which we have three outstanding speakers, very close, all three very close friends of mine, all three that I've had the privilege of working with in a variety of different settings. And our first speaker is Dr. Joseph Thornton. Dr. Thornton is a clinical associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Florida. He is also the chair of the UNESCO Bioethics Center at the University of Florida. But most germane to the discussion today, Dr. Thornton has been an incredible leader in terms of mental health organizations, both at the prison mental health system, the VA, the Veterans Hospital mental health system, the University of Florida mental health system, a state psychiatric hospital mental health system, and the state of Florida mental health system. And so he has leadership roles in a range of these settings. And on a personal note, when one talks about ethics and principled leadership, Dr. Thornton is someone I've learned a lot from. He has educated me about the actual practice of ethical leadership. So Joe, welcome. And Dr. Thornton will be speaking on ethics, artificial intelligence, and informed choices in organizations. Joe, over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tandon, a very generous and kind introduction. I'll see if I can share my slides and go to the slideshow. So thank you. So I was introduced by Dr. Tandon. I'm with the UNESCO Bioethics Unit, University of Florida, and had the honor of being inducted as a fellow at IIOP about 2 years ago. In terms of disclosures, I'm retired. I'm on what I call a self-funded sabbatical, which has started my exploration into AI. For ethics, I give my money to the Catholic Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, and I'm on the board for Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. However, the opinions here are my own. Known limitations or biases is I only speak English, I only read English. I'm focused on USA institutions, and I have a particular bias for AI towards Stanford. For what I hope we can accomplish briefly today is to describe the promises of artificial intelligence in healthcare for organizations, but also describe some of the potential perils. We'll describe strategies for ethical management, which are easier to identify than it is to put into practice. And then I hope you'll feel empowered to share information about artificial intelligence in healthcare with others because it's a current issue. Also, I should have mentioned on the disclosures, I'm not the most expert in AI, particularly within our group. Dr. Tandon, Dr. Keshavan have published significantly in the field, but think of me as an explorer, and I'm sharing with you what I've seen ahead for us. The take-home points are to think of artificial intelligence. It's not, typically we get stuck on thinking about general artificial intelligence. So there's this notion of the chess playing computer or to mimic humans, robots, but AI is much more broad. For our purposes, I'm including digital psychiatry and information. And so we look at things that enhance our ability to acquire and manipulate data. Also, we need to know that artificial intelligence is with us now, particularly in business and social media. It impacts our lives, impacts the way we deliver care, impacts the way we experience the world and conceive of ourselves. So it's important that we get an understanding about AI across the board because it's necessary for our free participation in society and our own self-identity. Also, this talk will be quite different from the morning. I don't have anything specific about COVID, but the COVID pandemic certainly, as people have described already, it's unveiled some of the challenges our society already had. So I'll talk about sharing the promise of artificial intelligence. So Eric Topol, who's the director of the Scripps Research Institute, prolific author and author of the book on deep medicine and a principal investigator with all of us research design here in the US, describes artificial intelligence will humanize healthcare by giving clinicians the gift of time. When we talk about burnout among physicians, a lot of the frustration prior to the pandemic was the attention to documentation, that we were, as clinicians, we were being ripped away from our patients and spending time bent over a computer screen typing in data. So the promise of the electronic health record, although it can make it easier to find data, there was so much more data that had to be accessed and to be entered that it actually took us away from patients. Now the records are more smart, they're more intelligent. They'll be able to provide synthetic notes, meaning that we could record like this process is being recorded now, and the computer could even synthesize and reduce the note to make a billable encounter. Therefore, with the information presented to the clinician, we can spend our 20 minutes talking with the patient and not doing the documentation or trying to acquire data. So that's the true promise in terms of humanizing healthcare, that we can return to our patients. And it's a great promise. AI is already within healthcare organizations. I include digital data because that's the core building block for artificial intelligence. Once you digitize data, it becomes a subject or object for AI programs. And data that's digitized now may provide food for these AI programs years from now. So data acquisition, retrieval, the search engine, certainly we're all familiar with the Google search engine, when we can put it electronic health records, call up information on our patients, the presentation of data, when you can get a graphical presentation of lab results or ratings, it helps us with our decision making, and you can even build in decision making assistance tools into the program. We often talk about hybrid intelligence, so where the computer sort of does things for us, and then we can do the things that the computer can't do at present time. When we talk about guidelines of care, we certainly experience in our practices with electronic health records how we can maybe want to prescribe a medication or order a test, and the computer will have a block to keep us from doing that or require further justification. In terms of projecting risk, I'm most familiar with our Veterans Administration. In the US, our Veterans Electronic Health Record scans 4 million veteran records every week and can prioritize on a variety of risk factors. In mental health, we were focused on suicide prevention. So they had 97 variables, and they would stratify these 4 million veterans according to their risk for suicidal behaviors, and then send reports to each of the institutions. And we were to reach out to the patients or veterans that represented the top 0.1% of risk. And by intervention with those veterans, the projection was we could reduce suicide by possibly as much as 30%. The data to prove that is still in development, but that's the hope and promise and the purpose of it. When we look at these risk projections, we think ahead and that maybe all our years of training in psychiatry for risk assessments will be for naught. I call your attention to an article by Fakuri, who provides a nice overview of artificial intelligence in psychiatry, written a year ago. He provides a definition for AI for his purposes and describes broad areas that AI can be used for within psychiatry. We've seen articles about semantic analysis. I believe Dr. Tandon and the group at Harvard have published on that, particularly for schizophrenia, maybe even for relapse in schizophrenia. And I'm interested in the research that says it can help predict the development of Alzheimer's disease years before evident clinical symptoms. Machine learning techniques can help refine assessments, they either combined with self-reported rating scales or incorporate in other data or passively acquired data. We've talked about the predictions, whether it's from diagnosis or behaviors such as suicide attempts. And then there's interest in how computers can help us with treatment. That was one of my first introductions to AI back in the mid 80s. We had some medical students from France who came over and wrote a program called Blue Box, which helped interview, assess the patient for depression, and provide some early counseling. Now there's multiple programs for computer-assisted therapy, and we talk about chat bots and just having psychotherapy with computers. We're not there yet, but the promise is developing. Oops, I'm sorry, I got to go back up. Now, as we look at these promises and how AI can be used, we have obvious concerns for safety and privacy. If we use these for projecting risk or diagnoses or treatment, is it safe? Is it reliable enough? And then the obvious issues about privacy. Our experience has sadly shown that wherever data exists, eventually it may be uncovered and disseminated without permissions. Another section that started addressing ethics specifically was this article by Linval and Cassell on ethics of mortality predictions in seriously ill people. And we've all heard in COVID about biases in risk projections for racial minorities and the poor. And then there can be biases in terms of the values built into the programs. What's the value of prolonging life? What's the value of quality of life? What are the values for that specific individual? Are those incorporated into the program? How do we know that they're incorporated into the program? It's well demonstrated that there are biases detected against women and minorities when you don't even identify that the women by sex or gender in the programs. And then a major concern is absent consent. If a person's treatment is being guided or influenced or conducted by an AI program, the essence of consent is that they know that. And even in our lives as physicians, we don't know the extent that the data that we use or the recommendations we received are generated from computer projections. Just bring here just to describe the digital psychiatry program at Harvard. It's led by John Torres, and again, co-director Dr. Keshavan, who's also with the IIOPM. They use smartphone data. You can have active data where the patient or client interacts with the smartphone to knowingly provide data to the clinician that's used for later interpretation. Then it can also collect passive data, in their case, with the consent of the patient, that can collect information about activities, interests that help provide supplemental information for assessment and predictions. So it's listed here, provide supplemental clinical assessments. They focus on clinical phenotyping, which Dr. Tandon's also published on. So can you identify from these types of information subsets of patients or states of patients that give clues for treatment interventions, which would be clinical precision. Precision medicine, again, as we can identify subtypes, we can target interventions that may provide a higher efficiency for a quality outcome. Switching a little bit to raise the idea of the perils of AI, it's most evident now in social media, which spills over to us in clinical practice now. So there's a recent docudrama that's easily accessible on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, describes what happened from the persuasive technology program at Stanford, that you could target and tweak how information is fed to people and it influences their behavior. So now it's well known that on Facebook that you get ads based on what you look at, or Google also adds what you look at or where you are or who you're with, that the computer can track that information and feed you data with the purpose of influencing your behavior to profit someone else. And most people are generally unaware, and certainly unaware to the extent of that. So the driving principle behind this design was profit building for other people. Unintended consequence of this technology has been, we know that strong affect motivates behavior more than contentment. And so particularly for politicians, it's a strategy to get their voters engaged by creating outrage or fear. And so that's had the unintended consequence in our society of social divisiveness, which there's been fears of provoked violence from this type of technology. And we've not demonstrated the capacity to reverse this effect of the social divisiveness. Once the genie's out of the bottle, how do we get it back? How do we recover from the distrust and the inanity that is developed now, that's artificially developed over the past decade? With this awareness, the Vatican, the Catholic Church, has actually called for a work group to address AI and ethics, and they worked on ethical principle to focus on human beings with equal rights and dignity, and that AI is going to be important in education, and we have to look at how it impacts the younger generations and include them in the process. And then we have to look at the rights are protected for people, the underprivileged, and we have to look at the importance of the natural environment. What they did not address, at least as of yet, are areas in artificial intelligence which explore the idea, if you go to general artificial intelligence, are we going to be creating computers that have moral standing? Where we don't discriminate whether the intelligence is based on carbon as we are, or silicon, and also the principle of non-discrimination based on ontogeny. Just because you weren't born to a human, do you have less rights and moral standing than people who are born to humans? So what do we do? How do we start addressing these issues about AI? Well, the first thing we have to do is develop our awareness and include more people in the process. We have to, particularly in healthcare and our organizations, we need to look at the impact on patients as a priority over the impact of the efficiencies of the operations or cost savings. We have to develop a program to look at bias in the review of the algorithms. And as Dr. Tandon may tell us later, that with machine learning, even the machine doesn't know how they develop the conclusions that it develops. We have to be far more inclusive and proactive to get the stakeholders involved and to work on the transparency of these processes. So this group, Linval and Gasol, and it's reflected, as I'll show later, in multiple other groups, say that healthcare systems, just like we do for our hospitals, specifically for AI, we need patient and family advisory councils to participate in this process. The Harvard group, again, has this share this table, give a brief overview about how it's important for boards of directors to have awareness, and ultimately they're responsible for how artificial intelligence is used in their institution. They're the ones who'll be held accountable if there's a breach of privacy or if there's systemic discrimination against their patients, clients, or employees. Then we also have in the clinical arena, Dr. Topol's group has published his sort of checklist for AI algorithms. If you're doing a study, these are the types of things you want to be able to examine, describe how the process was developed, how it was tested, how the data was collected, how it's interpreted, who's making those decisions. And then Dr. Tandon's group has published guidelines for reviewers. It's far more extensive. I think I counted 47 items in 8 domains that a reviewer should look into for articles that use machine learning or artificial intelligence as its means of intervention or reporting. They've even developed or appointed the machine learning section editor to assist the coordination with those reviews. And his group also recommended, as far as I know, it's not taken effect yet, to set up a global psychiatry conference of experts in AI and stakeholders, both from academics, hospitals, and the general public for AI and psychiatry. In terms of COVID-19 and artificial intelligence, this is the data that's most published is on morbidity, mortality predictions, and then what's of concern is resource allocation. So you've got a program that you believe predicts which patients presented to the ER have the probability of a very poor outcome despite interventions, and so you simply don't start the interventions at that time. Well, what were the biases in the patients who were studied? How was that tested? How do we know that it's true? And those things have not yet been worked out. This is obviously a tremendously complex slide, but for people who want to pursue this more, I find it very high yield. This is from the Berkman Klein Center, which is a useful, very useful starting place for this topic. They found 36 documents which addressed the principles of ethics in artificial intelligence. That's what these areas here are, the actual documents that address the issue. They found a general about 9 topics or domains were common in each of these 36 documents. So these were the themes here for privacy, accountability, safety, transparency, fairness, human control of the technology, professional responsibility, who's accountable if something goes wrong, promotion of human values, and international human rights. So these are common themes, and then it weights for each of these documents how much attention was paid on each of those levels. So this is very comprehensive, it's useful, but most of us don't really won't have the time to pursue that. So it's good for people who want to be more involved as a resource. It may be not so good for everyday use. I'm going to recommend or suggest for our group that we familiarize ourselves and our colleagues on the UNESCO Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. It's something that we've all have worked with. Most of us overlap with the UNESCO Bioethics Center. It's globally recognized by 192 countries. It's more systemic and comprehensive than simply the four principles, and it keeps foremost at the endeavor human dignity and human rights. So as we're familiar with these ethical principles, we can keep them in mind as we begin to deal with the issues of artificial intelligence. Key are solidarity, social responsibility, and help protecting future generations. What we do now impacts our children who are in school, or even people in high school, medical school will be impacted 5 years from now from decisions that are made this year. And of course, then protecting the environment. And as we've already heard about the impact of climate change, how we going to, the AI may identify that the risk of climate change has been underestimated, but then what are the recommendations that may be contrary to human life in order to protect the environment at a rational level? So draw to a close with strategies for ethical artificial intelligence. Our first thing we have to do is to monitor AI, and we have to monitor for conflicts. We have to know how it's being used, how are the decisions made, what's the transparency, who's deciding on it, who's accountable. So who in your organization would you go to find out how much AI has permeated your daily activities? Anyone who uses in the US a medical record like Epic or Cerner, it's pervasively present. If you use social media, it's pervasively present. If you have your smartphone on you and you have Facebook and you're in the room with a patient, Facebook could tell you that patient is seeing you. They would know that information. If you're dealing with a sports figure or celebrity, that could have serious consequences. If we want to change these programs, how do we do that? How do we identify the change and who do we go to make the changes? So these are all the issues we need to start working on. So what can you do as an individual? Again, we stay rooted in ethical principles. We've learned from our COVID experience, we have a long way to go and a lot of work to do to boost up our ethics training early and to develop it throughout the professional life cycle from our kids to our leadership and organizations. We have to learn more, find a way to get how AI permeates our life. Then we have to make conscious decisions on how we expose ourselves to the technology. Anna Lembke from Stanford, she's the chief of their addictions program, describes on the social dilemma how social media is just as addictive as other behaviors such as gambling or sex or other drugs and substances. And so as you get exposed to that, how are you going to control that? And how will you recognize that it's excess use? So for those type of issues, refer to this Center for Humane Technology. Now, I leave you with just a future resource, this QR code. I like for the UNESCO group, I've built in a interactive or participatory survey that will have the references I alluded to in this talk and in some more areas. Would ask maybe that you identify your location in terms of country and state, just so we can see the distribution of this type of activity. It's not ready at this moment, but should be ready at the end of the session today and certainly by the session next week. So I appreciate your time and attention this day, and we'll turn it over back to Dr. Tandon.
Thank you, Joe. Excellent presentation, comprehensive overview of a complex topic, Joe. Why don't we hold off on questions till the end, till all the other two speakers have also spoken. We will have 45 minutes. I can already see some great questions coming in. So thank you, Joe. Let me introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jasvinder Singh Bamra. JS, as he is, as I call him, and most people know him as. JS is a reader at the University of Manchester. He is the national chairman of the British Association of Physicians of Indian Origin. He is a commander of the British Empire. And, you know, the other day, I mean, about a year ago, I asked him, so JS, how many troops do you command? And he said, well, Rajiv, you'll soon find out. And I did find out, actually, just during actually, it was an IIOPM conference that had been organized. Shrikant, Russell, Mohandas, and JS, amongst others, with Dr. Thornton, amongst others, were there. When two of the faculty members, somewhat junior faculty members, who actually had been mentoring for quite some time, came up to me and said, you know, Rajiv, we have a new model. We thought you were the person that we wanted to model ourselves after, but now it's JS. I mean, he is my hero. And so now I know, JS, how many troops you command. Dr. Bamra is going to be speaking on COVID-19, individual and organizational role in improving mental health resilience. JS, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Rajiv. You are my hero. You know, I can't even, I'm on that. I can't even command anything, let alone, you know, a whole British Empire. But listen, it's great to see you guys. Thank you so much, Russell. Thank you, Srikant, for putting an exciting program together. Great to see Derek as well, and Mohandas. It's always a pleasure. And Shabir, who's in shame of me not being able to command any troops, just hid himself and he's shown himself again. And I'm sure there are very many good friends here that I've valued their company and learned a lot from. So, you know, this is a very difficult topic, Rajiv, because of course, you know, you don't read about resilience in your textbooks, do you? They're not in your medical curriculum. And that is why I thought I'd bring it up, because it is a word that's cropped up repeatedly over the last 6 or 7 or 8 months or so. And I thought, well, actually, look, let me do a personal journey on this so that I learn, even if you don't learn from me. I think that, and absolutely, by the way, Joe did a fantastic talk. I was so impressed, you know, he did a QR code at the end, which captured his talk as well as his references. This guy is artificial intelligence encapsulated, isn't it? And I don't even have bloody slides today. So I'm really sorry, but forgive me, Joe, for letting the side down. I thought that this is something that I wanted to kind of abstract on and maybe make it interactive, and I'd be very happy for people to post questions on it, because as I said, it is not a neurotransmitter type of talk. It isn't about, you know, what is laid out in the textbooks, certainly not for medics, and it is probably something that is CEOs get daily give talks on and get daily talks on. But so I wanted to look at two things: individual resilience and organizational resilience. And the first thing, as we do as medics, is look at what is there, you know, what is the research in this, and what does it actually mean? Well, actually, funnily enough, if you look at Googling it and that sort of thing, you'll find that resilience means you're tough, you know, you're tough old caddy, you know, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And what I liked was that elasticity, you know, that you're like, you know, who's that chap in X-Men? I forget what his name is, but, you know, somebody bendy, somebody who can just completely bounce back, that sort of thing. The ability of a substance or an object or a person to shape back into action after, or shape back into shape after you've been tortured and all sorts of things have happened to you. Or as the Oxford English Dictionary describes it, the ability to recover readily from depression. So that came into the Oxford English Dictionary, although I don't think they actually meant it in that sort of way. But what resilience really means is psychological resilience, which is your ability to mentally and emotionally cope with any crisis that comes your way. So that's what I thought was probably the definition that really cut its ice with me. That is the thing. It's about that ability, psychological resilience. Oh, by the way, I mentioned to a good learned friend of mine that I was going to talk about resilience. And they said, well, I don't like that word. I said, why? Well, it means you've got to be thick-skinned, isn't it? I said, well, not really, but being thick probably helps. Sorry, forgive me. But I'm not sure that it means being thick-skinned because, you know, if you're too thick-skinned, you might actually not realize that, you know, what's going on around the world. Although obviously, as I've been a medical director, sometimes it does help to be a little bit thick-skinned at times. And I'm sure you will all have in your mind what it means to be resilient. And one of the things about resilience is not me torturing you with slides on this topic, obviously. But there are a number of characteristics that would make your resilience work or make resilience matter. You know, I think good relationships, now we do that very well in mental health. We don't do that as well as I'd like. Maintaining good relationships, having good functional MDTs, that sort of thing actually improves your resilience. It doesn't matter whether you're in an organization or whether you're in a family situation or anything else, but we know that a good relationship is a good buffer for coping with stresses and crises and that sort of thing. And I think, you know, and this is what you will know, this patients with anxiety disorder, the first thing they do is catastrophize everything. You know, a neighbor 10 places down the street is in isolation. Oh, COVID's coming to my street and that sort of thing. You know, I better lock in. So that sort of fight, flight, and fear reaction, we should try and get a little bit of immunity from that, and to try and see that every crisis is not that unbearable. You know, it's a challenge rather than a crisis. You know, convert that C word. Every crisis is a challenge. And of course, you know, something that medics don't do very well, you know, we have difficulty accepting that sometimes we can't effect change. We really struggle with that. I wouldn't say medics are the only people who do that. In the National Health Service, I'm sure this happens in Australia, as well as America, Canada, and other places, India, where we are just expected to cure patients. We are there to cure illness. We are there to make everything work. And so that acceptance that sometimes, look, we've done our best, comes very hard to us, isn't it? But in the NHS, I can speak for the NHS thrives on excellence. Everything has to be outstanding. You know, second place won't do. Even when the Care Quality Commission comes around and inspects hospitals and other places, they want that outstanding mark. You know, you have to be exceptional. An average won't do. If you're good, you're not good enough. And that is an issue that we have, you know, in modern day health services, you know. So somebody is not who is adequate. Well, you know, I've been adequate all of my life. 99% of my time I've been adequate. You know, has it done me harm? Well, if it has, I don't know where the harm is, but maybe it has. Maybe I'm insightless. But of course, you know, I think sometimes being average, being good is okay. Folks, it's all right to be average. It's okay to be good. You can't always be outstanding. But of course, so it's important to have realistic goals, isn't it? And sometimes when we draw up our PDP, this happens more in management, you know. So in management, they expect each other to be, you know, right up there. Been there, as I said, as an executive director. You know, you have to have unattainable goals sometimes, you know. The first year I became medical director, my goal was that I would have a SIP, which is cost improvement a program. I would have to cut back on £350,000 from my budget. Well, when I've got a crisis on, how am I going to do that? When I'm actually going to need more staff, actually, rather than less. When the place is running with so many locums who I actually value, how can I? So we have these sometimes unachievable, unrealistic goals, which can have a demoralizing effect, actually. So it's important to have realistic goals. It's important to take decisive action as well. Now, sometimes I've learned that from my management colleagues as medics. Sometimes we don't do very well because, particularly as psychiatrists, we like to be nice to everybody, but being nice may not be doing the right thing always, to be truthful. So taking decisive action when you need to is important. But it's important also to look at opportunities, look at things around you, look at the person who's best suited to do this. All that is important. And of course, self-confidence, not arrogance, self-confidence goes a long way to helping achieve that kind of resilience. And I'm very happy for you folks to throw eggs at me every time I say resilience. But look at the longer term option, so, okay, I don't quite go for the 10-year forward plan in the National Health Service because, you can't predict what's going to happen. Nobody predicted that COVID-19 would happen this year. But, but do have a longer term plan, do have a longer term option, but make it a bit elastic, to use that word. Make sure that you are actually adapting to change. What about organization resilience? Well, what can I say? Well, organization resilience, of course, it's the ability of an organization to anticipate, to prepare, and to respond, and to adapt to change. It doesn't have to be negative change, but it also helps to have that in place in case of sudden disruptions. Now, we've had that as executive teams all the time, about either terrorist attacks or some calamity like floods or things like that. We always have, and the flu pandemic, all boards have to prepare themselves for that. But some do it rather better than others. I'll come to that later on. It's more than just having a risk register. I think they must have risk registers in Canada, America, and Australia. I think in India, some organizations probably have that as well. I'm not sure. But it's okay to have a risk register, but actually it's more than that. It's not just about risk management. It's about having a longer term option, having a supportive culture, having the ability to engage, the ability to be inventive, just do it. I think that's one thing we've lost out in medicine whole time, not just in psychiatry, because we have that bit that, you have to do everything by nice guidelines. If you waver out of a certain standard deviation, you're in trouble, mate. You can't prescribe 40 milligrams of paroxetine, or you can't give such and such a thing. And you cannot not put somebody on a statin, even though, they've got a high chance of developing diabetes, and it's not going to increase their quality of life, or reduce their risk of stroke or whatever you're going to do. So I think that bit that I used to see when I was a medic training, about the inventiveness, the ability to just kind of do something, it might seem a bit weird at the time, but, it pans out. So resilience is, and I think sometimes we equate resilience to success, and I think that is so unfortunate. Resilience is not necessarily success, folks. Resilience is about sometimes just being able to do the job, on the day. You've got kids screaming at home, you've got, a leak in the bathroom, you've got one colleague off that day, you've still got to turn up to hospital, you've got 10 patients in the waiting room, and is that success? Well, relatively it is, but some people would say, well, actually, you didn't do very well because, your patients, you kept them waiting, or you did this and that. So I think resilience isn't necessarily success. Sometimes resilience is just to be able to do the job on the day. And what really helps resilience? I think curiosity certainly helps. And curiosity, then being able to apply that curiosity to turn it into some kind of a positive action for your patient, your organization, for your colleagues, is very important. I think it helps to have an investigative nature. I remember when I was a kid, I used to ask this question, why? And my mum used to get really upset. She's next door, so I think hopefully she can't hear me. But why? I used to always ask that question, Q. And oh my goodness, that used to get under her skin. You ask too many questions, shut up. So that investigative nature is good. I think a lot of us have it, and it's good. I think being able to learn, I think that's one good thing about medicine, I can say as a whole. I'm sure other professions do this, but certainly we are expected to learn. Even though you're 80, you're still learning. you give up psychiatry and you're still learning, you just become into that, you get into that mindset, And then acting from what you've learned is very important. And also understanding Murphy's Law. I'm sure you've heard of Murphy's Law. Shabir, have you heard of Murphy's Law? You have? Okay. If anything can go wrong, it will. Okay, maybe you're being pessimistic, Shabir, but it's all right. If something, if it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong. It may not go wrong because of your best efforts. So resilience doesn't mean that something has gone wrong, to be truthful. So I hope all that is making sense, Rajiv. Am I off on a tangent? Have I reduced your resilience?
You only increase my resilience. I mean, little that I have, it's really grown considerably.
Oh, well,
I'm looking forward to growing it even.
Fantastic. So it's about, that culture, which you'll hear about very well. And this happened, it came to a crisis. Many of you will have heard the case of Bawagaba. Dr. Hadiza Bawagaba was a trainee, pediatric trainee. She'd just come back from mat leave. And on the first day she was on mat leave, she was put on call as a pediatric trainee. In her final year, she was 1 year from becoming a consultant. And a whole lot of host of blame was thrown on her, poor girl. And this has taken a new meaning for everybody now. Learn, not blame. I remember when I was a medical director, one of the trainees gave one of my patients 100 units of insulin. Now, 100 units of insulin to a patient who is elderly, and anybody will know, is a huge amount of insulin. The guy went into a coma. He survived, fortunately, because the nurses called the on-call doctor straight away after giving it, and that doctor acted speedily, got the patient to A&E, made the right diagnosis, and the patient survived. Well, the patient could have been dead, but it was bad enough that the patient was in a coma. And this could have been a disaster for the girl. I thought, so I was asked, to report her to the GMC. So I said, well, look, this is an honest mistake. What she should have done is, when you write 10 and then you write a U as in units, that U looked like an O. So she should have written 10 units. It was an honest mistake that could have been fatal. That patient survived, by the way. What I did was I met with the family. I explained, look, junior doctor, learning about this thing, it's an honest mistake, and she's now a practicing GP, by the way. The family did not want to do anything. They understood that. I did actually speak to the GMC, and I said, look, I'm not going to refer this girl. I think this doctor, I should say, because it's an honest mistake. I think too often we are unforgiving of honest mistakes, to be truthful. And of course, Hadiza did make honest mistakes, but actually what it did was it penalized her for something that was not considered to be a culture of not supporting. So a culture of training and learning is crucial, I think, both to the individual as well as the organization. As Russell would say, investing in the human capital. How many times have we heard Russell say that? Investing in the human capital, and I'll twist that into something positive, makes that organization more resilient, because every single individual is what makes the organization. And that is it. And do we invest in that human organization? Well, and I'll bring it now to COVID, because I've got 4 minutes to go. And just turn it around to COVID. Now you will see that all around the world, there's been considerable stress about COVID. And of course, we in the National Health Service, I'm sure you folks have had it in Australia, America, Canada, and India as well. The lack of proper equipment for doctors, nurses, and other folks really tested us to an extreme. In fact, people have died while serving the National Health Service at the front line. The lack of PPE and the lack of, so BAPIO did a survey early on. We were the first organization to write to the NHS to say, look, 14 doctors of a BME origin have died. There's something wrong in the system. We wrote that letter on the 7th of April to Sir Simon Stevens, to Stephen Powis, Duncan Selby, all of them, to say, look, there is something wrong in the system. They were late to act, I have to say. But the point of it is, there are organizations who took it right to the positive extreme, which is, no, we're going to provide them with what they need. We don't want to put them at risk. And there were others, and we got them in our survey. A number of people were reprimanded for asking for PPE. A number of people were told you are a troublemaker. And that should never have happened. COVID has brought the best out of people and the best out of organizations, but it's also brought out the worst out of many organizations. And every organization has to do risk assessments. Well, some are doing it, some are not. Many are not applying it. I think that's the kind of thing that should be done to make the organization resilient. I think we have to understand every single person as that human capital, all 6,000, 7,000 of them as being the people who are the organization, and to look after them, because the scars for some of these people will never be forgotten, while those who've been supported, they will have shown complete loyalty to that organization. And I think that's what resilience will be for that organization, because these are the people, very people, who are going to support it when the next pandemic comes around in 4 years' time. Well, I've just opened my crystal ball, by the way, and I've worked out that 2014 is going to be a year then when we need to be somewhere else, Mars maybe. But thank you very much, Rajiv. I think I've more or less finished.
Thank you so much, JS. I mean, just a wonderful overview. By the way, since we're getting astrological in the last bit, let me share with you that there's going to be a major astronomic event. Saturn and Jupiter are coming as close as they've come in the last 400 years. And so it's just going to be half a degree. And that's supposed to be a major astronomic phenomenon because, as you know, astrologically, Jupiter is the planet of wealth, prosperity. Saturn is the planet of destruction. And when the two come together, there's supposed to be major upheaval, major revolution. Now, the important thing here is that this is, after 400 years, this is the first time that this particular conjunction is happening in Aquarius, in the sun sign of Aquarius. And what that means, it's always happened in earthy, which is materialism, wealth, things of that sort. But the Aries sun sign, Aquarius, it means it's going to be a time of humanity, creativity, shared humanity, if you will. And so it's a time to look forward to. By the way, Pluto is also going to be very close. I can spend a lot of time sharing with you the astronomical details and the astrological implications, perhaps in the discussion. So thanks a lot, JS. Outstanding.
But Rajiv, was that astronomy or was that astrology?
There you go. Was it individual or was it organizational resilience?
Was it organizational? Terrific.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, JS. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our third speaker, Dr. Shabir Amanullah. Dr. Amanullah is the Chief of Psychiatry at Woodstock Hospital. Dr. Amanullah is an incredibly thoughtful, incisive thinker, kind, gentle at his core, and yet very incisive and very sharp in terms of the intelligence, the breadth of information, and and what he conveys. I would like to share a personal connection to Dr. Amanullah. I did have the privilege of preceding him by about 12 years at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, and I feel fortunate to be able to say, I trained at the same institute that Dr. Amanullah did. Dr. Amanullah will be speaking on From Stressed to Burnt Out, the automatic fast lane. Shabir, over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me clearly. And I'm sharing the slides as well. Thank you so much, Rajiv. You've always been very effusive in your introductions, and many times I think I don't deserve a lot of the credits we get during introductions. I have the very difficult task of speaking At the end of the day, after you've had all these incredibly talented and erudite scholars speaking, it's almost as if I've been asked to perform after Amitabh Bachchan, Shah Rukh Khan, and the likes. My task is to some extent made easier because they've already alluded to some of the key aspects of what IIOPM stands for. I have to make mention about the incredible knowledge I have gained since becoming a member of the IIOPM. Russell is a stalwart, as you all know, but it gave me insights into organizational functioning from the likes of Shrikant, Rajiv, when I met him in Florida, and the work he does there, and JS as well. But Professor Mohandas, I don't know how many of you don't know about him. He's very well known in India, but he's the only person who has been a mentor for me from India after I left India. So it speaks volumes about the reach of the IIOPM. So I do have to give credit to some of the slides I have in here, which I borrowed from the IIOPM and the geniuses who work with them. Now, what I hope to do here is make a few disclosures in keeping with what we are expected to kind of do. I have given a few lectures for pharmaceutical companies, and I've received grants. I do have a patent in my name. I do not have any conflict of interest, except that the earlier presenters are good friends of mine. One of the key things in life we learn is that there are basically two kinds of people. People who are accomplished, who've done things, and those who claim to have accomplished things. The first group is less crowded. This is a very important lesson to learn in life, not because of how the statement entices us into feel very philosophical, but rather this reflects the truism of today, where people who've accomplished very little need other people to beat their drums to say this is what they have done. Be very careful, because as the talk goes on, you'll see it has a profound effect, not just in what JS spoke about in terms of resilience, but also the salience networks in our brain that make us feel peaceful and calm, which we sometimes talk about in terms of of mindfulness that Subodh alluded to. What do I hope to achieve in this talk of mine? The first is I'd like to teach you some of the signs of stress. There was a very good question in the box, and I'm hoping some of these questions will be addressed in my lecture. To learn about burnout and burnout, right? Predictors, how not to get onto the fast lane. I'm going to start off with something that we have in the last few years come across as very problematic. So these are websites that are very highly reputed. And this was there on one of the websites, which stated that Arnoldo Ailman was the president of Nigeria. He was in office for 5 years, and he apparently embezzled $100 million. I was born in Nigeria. There's no president by that name. But what it did for the uneducated or the WhatsApp trigger-friendly individual is to associate that name with corruption. And we all know that that name is associated more specific with the religious subgroup. We are seeing more and more of this happening as the world polarizes into a very tribalistic kind of functioning, which is very interesting when we talk about astrology that Rajiv was talking about in terms of what we should see coming. The advantage of these things is you become prepared for it. So this talk is meant to actually not just enhance human capital management, but to protect human capital as well by preserving your intellectual integrity. This is a video that often we see on TV screens, but when we enter the aircraft, we have to actually listen to it, where they talk to you about how you first take care of yourself. We know that this is a truth, but how many of us really follow it? So for example, you're exhausted, you know you can't make those decisions, you still go ahead and do it. The truth is you're completely useless if you are not yourself functioning well. And especially in a day and age when you're stressed, your ability to deliver is going to be minimal. Now, prior to COVID, the world was going through a lot of things. I would read reports of doctors in India being beaten, and honestly, you would feel terrible about what was going on because we know the conditions in which many of these doctors functioned. We were also worried about the lack of effective advocacy, not just in Britain, not just in Canada. And I sit in very many leadership positions in Canada. It is often troubling to see the complete lack of interest in what physicians go through. Never in the past have we ever felt like we have literally no power. Communication, there's WhatsApp, there's all kinds of communication methods, but we no longer communicate. We tell one another what to do and what we expect. We do not communicate. Also, prescribing practices have been opened up to so many different people. And I can honestly tell you the number of errors I have seen in prescribing by allied professionals is scary, absolutely scary. I have individuals who are being given Ritalin to boost the effect of antidepressants. And I get these patients coming in with significant agitation and psychosis. Now, with all those things going on, we have the pandemic. Now, things that we knew were not working and we complained about are still there. Things that we were frustrated about are now unfortunately part of regular work. Our concerns about pay, concerns about expansion of scope of practice without any accountability that one can actually seek refuge in and go and complain. None of that is happening. So in essence, we are literally feeling increasingly that the pressure was so much we didn't know what to do. Now, there was a study done in Canada, and it was done by the Canadian Medical Association. It was an exceptionally good study done, and I would advise that you guys look this up, 2018. They looked at the breakdown based on different specialties and looked at anesthesia, psychiatry, primary care, lab medicine, different fields. Conventionally, we would think that the highest risk was with anesthesia and with psychiatry, ophthalmology. This study actually showed some very different things. But before we go into the key findings, I'm going to talk to you about what the key issues with stress is all about. So Russell spoke about post-embitterment. I am talking about burnout, right? JS spoke about the whole issue of resilience, right? And then we had a talk about mindfulness. So what is it that the issue is? I mean, is stress bad? Stress is not bad. It's just that if stress becomes persistent, it's a problem. But stress in minor doses is actually fine. In fact, in the 60s, when they found that this relaxation thing wasn't working and they wanted people to become, within quotes, more able to cope with stress, they had stress inoculation therapy, for heaven's sake. So what is stress? Now, stress can be anything to do with an exam, you have an accident, or you have an acute event that's completely out of the ordinary. Or, for example, you're in a sporting event and you happen to make the finals in cricket and you're playing. There's going to be stress for sure. But many people excel when they have that stress. Many people excel with optimal anxiety. So is stress in of itself a problem? It really isn't. And you'll see when it does become a problem. So the key features of acute stress are things like anxiety, palpitation, shortness of breath. You have your mind racing, you have poor concentration, sometimes there's guilt, shame, a degree of restlessness, and you become very defensive and you're a bit more irritable and angry about things that have gone on. So these are the more acute features of stress, right? What it leads on to as a consequence as well are things like avoidance. I don't want to face JS again. I made a mistake. I feel embarrassed to see him. On a biological level, BDNF is lowered. We know that immune responses initially it's triggered in acute stress, and then with chronic stress it goes down. So you're more prone to infection. And it beggars the question with COVID, are we going to see a lot more cases actually acquiring non-COVID infections in large numbers? We don't know. But if immunity is going to be suppressed because of chronic stress, we need to be aware of those kinds of things. Forget lifestyle diseases. These things will compound over a period of time. Increases in blood pressure with acute stress. So with all this stress going on, they did the study to look at burnout, right? So you have stress and then we have burnout. What they found was, in some ways, things that we always knew. Those in administrative positions were flourishing. So strong advice, look for good administrative positions. Now, we don't know what the finer mechanisms of this are as to why is it that people in admin positions do very well. But the assumption would be because you can relegate some of the responsibility, not delegate, you can relegate. Good leadership, however, is not about relegating. Good leadership is, like Tony said, it's about being present, available, visible, accessible, and accountable. What about medical specialties? They found that 57% they were kind of okay, but the highest level of resilience was found among surgical specialties. And within them, 93% were in administrative positions. So surgical, it's very interesting to know the dynamics behind this, because people in surgery have to be a lot more decisive than in other specialties, like psychiatry, because it is something you have to do that has incredibly longer-term repercussions. You could have that in emergent medicine as well. So it'll be interesting to see the links between emergent medicine and surgical specialties. Depression, however, interestingly, was highest in lab medicine. So this was done in 2018, prior to COVID. Given that most of us now are functioning in, within quotes, lab medicine-like environments where all we have is the screen and the telephone and face-to-face contact has been cut down, it raises the question as to whether we're going to be seeing a much higher rate of depression among our colleagues. Suicidal ideation was highest in lab specialties. So why is all this so important? Why is it that the IIOPM being at the forefront of this is so important at this point in time? It's very simple. We need a body that is able to focus on how we manage human capital, not just maximizing individuals' abilities to enjoy what they do, but to see how the corporate culture evolves in a healthy manner that not just the corporation, but the individual and the relationships at work flourish. So there was this article that came out in the New York Times, and it's a terrific read. It's about the business of healthcare and how it depends on exploiting doctors and nurses. This was a more tragic case post-COVID, an ER physician who actually committed suicide. And the way she did it was quite traumatic. And so it actually is worrying, not because she did what she did specifically, but because the colleagues around her did not see that she was actually burning out. This is a big problem. We have no excuse not to know what's happening with a colleague. So burnout is defined in so many different ways. And one of the best definitions I've come across is by Maslach and later, these are the people who created the burnout inventory. And it's a terrific scale. I've used it in our studies, is to actually define it as the index of dislocation between what people are and what they do. It's also defined as a physical and mental collapse caused by an overwork of stress. And also it's a reduction of a fuel or substance to nothing through use or combustion. So it's very interesting to look at what burnout means from the philosophical point of view, the practical physician health point of view, but also just burnout from what's a very material thing. This is a very interesting model, and I'll go through it very quickly because there's not too much time. But if you don't take anything else today, I'd like you to learn the importance of what you do in terms of your primary appraisal. Your primary appraisal is extremely important because we all know it's almost always about how we perceive a specific phenomena. If you perceive it as a threat, your secondary appraisal and your attributions are going to lead on to negative coping tendencies and take a big hit on your ability to cope with the disaster or difficulties. Or like JS said, when you have multiple things going on, including a flood or a leak, and you have to come in for work, your ability to cope is going to be completely compromised if your primary appraisal is that somebody is taking advantage of me, nobody cares about me. Now, here's the fundamental truth. Who really are we? So I'm going to play this video. I sincerely hope you can hear it.
Here, that's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
So the reason I played that video was just to tell and remind ourselves that we really are nothing in the larger scheme of things. And yet we have this idea that somehow something I stand for is so profound that your rights come secondary to mine, that I'm in a position of authority and I can bully you to any extent because I have the power to do that. We've seen that and we see it happening again and again and again. But why is it that this happens time and again? And why is it that it's related to burnout? So do you remember there was a study that Subodh was kind of alluding to in terms of looking at data and recognizing diversity and being inclusive? I won the election to be the president of the Canadian Geriatric Academy because I was talking importantly about the role not just of diversity, but how we go about effectively being inclusive, because something on paper doesn't necessarily translate into practice. So when you talk about the whole notion of burnout, my perception that someone doesn't find me being fit, even though I'm equally qualified because of some other reason, can lead on to what, like Russell said, the post-embitterment, but much before that is the phenomena of burnout. So as a concept, it is well validated. There's factor analysis that's been done to prove it. So we don't really have any questions there. But we tend to give too much importance to irrelevant things. So sometimes we can construe something as being wrong by overreading it. So how do we stop it? How do we control the salience in our mind? So there's a very interesting thing. This is a bit comical. So Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson go camping and they pitch their tent under the stars and they fall asleep. And in the middle of the night, Holmes wakes up and he says to Watson, Watson, look at the sky and tell me what you see. So Watson says, I see thousands upon thousands of stars. And what do you deduce from that, Watson? Well, Watson says, well, if there are perhaps millions of stars, and even if just a few of them have planets like Earth, it means there might be life out there. So Holmes says, is that your final answer? And he says, yes, it is, Holmes. And so Holmes turns to him and says, Watson, you're a complete idiot. It means that our tent was stolen. So often in life, we miss what's right in front of us. And we come up with all these theories, which you can actually see how these conspiracy theories build up. And it's important to us today because never in human history has information, both incorrect, fake, and accurate information, been so easily available. And yet our penchant to pick what it is that we're looking for, very beautifully picked up by Dr. Thornton in the AI thing about how we tend to look for those informations and how Google programs it such that we get the information we are looking for. It feeds into this narrative that can lead on to our believing in certain things which may be completely wrong. So what do I teach people? I often say, stay away from negative people. They have a problem for every solution. So what can we do in terms of recognizing stressors? The first is learning how to manage things like, your business. In Canada and in the US, I can speak more for Canada, we have to bill for our services. So I see a patient, I bill, I send the thing into the government, they pay me. Loss of traditional status of doctors, interference with family values, poor remuneration, lack of appreciation, after-call, work, all these things play a part. But what makes it worse is this. And this basically tells us what we all face on a regular basis.
My asthma. They said they'd fix it, but it didn't make any difference at all.
Well, sometimes doctors make mistakes. Anna, you need to try twice as hard to fix them. Are you using your inhaler?
All the time. Go through one a week.
You sure you're using it right?
Do I look like an idiot?
No. Why don't you show me how your inhaler works?
This is what we have to deal with today. I'm not kidding you. I've had patients who have come and told me, I take my medication, this is probably something you've heard as well, and I stopped taking it because I was feeling better. You give me a good reason why I should keep taking it. So the analogy I often give them is, do you take oral contraceptives? They say, yes. I said, why didn't you stop taking it? You've not gotten pregnant in the last 2 years. Well, if I stop, I'm going to end up getting pregnant. I said, there you go, bingo. And then they look at it and say, oh my God, that makes a whole lot of sense. But the point is, we increasingly have to deal with people who have information from Google that's not just wrong, it's ridiculous. We have people coming and telling me that cannabis is good for my psychosis. I tell them, yes, it's good for your psychosis, not for your well-being. But the problem is, we are fighting an almost impossible task thanks to Google's AI, where the program is you get more information that you're looking for, and it feeds into this paradigm. So what are the key things we need to look for when you're burning out? The first is, and this is very important because prior to post-embitterment, we need to know the things that build onto the whole burnout thing. There's mental exhaustion, fatigue. You can also have parallels with clinical depression, but it does not respond to antidepressants. And this is very important to know. The emphasis is on mental and behavioral symptoms more than physical ones. Burnout is work-related, but you can burn out when you're a caregiver as well. You can burn out in relationships. You can be married and you can burn out. And with the current COVID restrictions, we have so many couples burning out and we have domestic violence going up. It's often important to see whether burnout is an important component of their presentation. You find that work is not very effective. It no longer gives you pleasure. You're not able to do very much because you've become cynical. Workplace bullying has gone up. It has become a lot easier if the environment in which you're working says that bullying is part of the culture and somehow sexism is acceptable. And sometimes this goes on for years and years. And I did a presentation to a group of lawyers where I was looking at the statistics. And it's astounding to see how many female lawyers feel that it's extremely paternalistic and they don't get cases being referred to them because they are women. This is the 21st century, and it's astounding to hear these things still happening. But I guess it does, and we sometimes believe that it isn't, and it's all about perception. So if they perceive this is happening, then it is happening. I won't go into details here, but if we have time during discussion, I'll be happy to go through this chart. It's a lovely study. Again, this is something I got from Shrikant. I'm truly grateful for this. In addition, we have medical legal issues that are coming up, and the case that JS spoke about was truly tragic. It was a complete perversion of justice, but then who am I to say that? I'm sitting here in Canada, but I know the similar things happen all over. We also know that maintaining amicable relationships with colleagues can be stressful. We know that there's problems with accreditation. There's so much more paperwork we need to do, so much restriction in terms of what we can do in terms of flexibility. You may be extremely bright in a clinical work, but you can't go beyond a certain of milligrams of medication. You're stuck. What do you do? Now I'm coming towards the conclusion of my talk. A few more slides to go. How do you not get onto the express lane? Well, for that, you first need to know when you are on the express lane, because most of the times we have no idea. The lanes just merge so smoothly, it's almost like you're in the M20. I'm just joking there. So the key things are things like work pressure, dilution of human decency. There's been such rabid politics. It is unbelievable. Human beings who we conventionally consider to be decent human beings, the depths of depravity. This actually not just affects the individual, it affects society. Next is societal expectations. It's almost acceptable that you can say anything to insult anybody today because we have leaders doing the same thing. Financial worry, uncertainty of the stock markets, interpersonal stresses, and what Subodh spoke about in terms of poor sleep. I do need to add a bit of a caveat here. The apps do not have a sustained benefit on sleep. They have a transient benefit, and I think some of it could be the novelty effect, but not sustained. I'm still waiting for longer term data to come out. COVID, Zoom. We have so many Zoom seminars. I'm sure that Prof. Mohan actually has another 2 more webinars after ours. Easy to feel zoomed out. WhatsApp is tiring. There's toxic tribalism out there, unhealthy diets. And to top it all, there's alcohol. I am seeing so many people presenting to me, colleagues, with alcohol being a problem. So what are the simple things you can do? The first is to recognize, try and reverse, and the word that JS spoke about, which I will not mention, it starts with R. What are the things we should do to improve our well-being? First is avoid overeating, smoking, alcohol. Try to avoid unnecessarily criticizing other people. It does nothing but excite our amygdala. Doesn't really help anything. Over-the-counter medications. Avoid soothsayers. These are not problem solvers. They're just going to tell you that the fire you're walking on is very temporary. Once you get out of it, you're going to feel great. You won't feel great. Avoid quacks. Avoid pseudo-counselors. Make some really good psychiatrist friends. Make some good friends out there who you know you can turn to when you're in trouble. Avoid too many WhatsApp groups. We don't have any data into what's an optimal number of groups to be involved in, but I would presume the content is important. Avoid forwarding hateful messages. It doesn't really help anybody. Let people make up, do not let people make up your mind. Do not say yes when you actually want to say no. Saying no is a fabulous thing. I learned that as I grew older. It's so nice to be able to say no. Don't say yes. This is a graph. I won't go into it, but I'm sure when there's time for discussion, I can go into it because it feeds very well into some of the questions that had popped up that I saw. This is important, though. This is a very important diagram because it talks about when Subodh spoke about the role of mindfulness and people getting angry and, don't bring that word up again. Mindfulness, resilience, and stress, along with burnout, are words that actually trigger a degree of irritability. Because it's almost as if you talk about it, but it doesn't work. The truth is it does work, but you have to give it a fair shot and you have to understand what it is that it does. So Russell knows this very well, and I refer to the amygdala as the drama queen. The amygdala loves nothing more than drama. So if you've watched Gone with the Wind and Scarlett O'Hara, this is the drama queen of our brain. The hippocampus is very good friends with the amygdala. It loves to store that messages. JS called you the other day. He said you were a complete idiot. JS, I'm not going to talk to him again, without letting my prefrontal cortex step in and say, actually, JS was actually talking to someone else on the phone at the same time he was talking to you. And my prefrontal cortex would have actually told the amygdala, delete that. That's not negative. He was talking to somebody else, and the amygdala has to shut up. We unfortunately don't train ourselves to do that. We have become such an amygdala society. It is shameful. So I'm coming towards the end again. Key things: burnout is associated with depressive picture, but it's different. You need to distinguish the two. You need to focus on what we can do to prevent burnout and don't wait for it to arise. And how do you let go in life? The key thing is we really have very little control in life over anything. And if you're a married man, you'll agree with me. The more we try to control things, the more we get stressed. The more we get stressed, the less we have to offer. The less you have to offer, the more frustrated you get. The more frustrated we get, the more likely you're to make mistakes. The more errors you make, you have your friendly neighborhood GMC waiting to pounce on you. Why worry? Let go. Tell yourself every morning, you're just a human being. You're not the only healthcare provider on earth. You're not the brightest spark out there. You may be bright. There's definitely another brighter spark around the corner. ensure a multidisciplinary practice, make use of these roles that have stepped in to buffer your responsibility in terms of workload. Pick up the phone and talk to a colleague you're not getting along with. Don't keep doing the email business. Don't do that, because sometimes emails you shoot off when you're angry. Don't do that. That's the fastest way to get burnout. Have coffee with coworkers. Go spend some time with them. Don't just sit and think everything is okay. Do not take on extra responsibility than you don't have to. It's really not worth it. Go to work early and leave early if you can. If you can do Tai Chi, you can do your prayers, you can do yoga, please do, or even take a 10-minute walk with your masks on. In the end, human capital management is vacuous without spiritual health and the pursuit of truth. This is the one thing that tempers the amygdala, that promotes our prefrontal cortex. Very, very important. In fact, there is a beautiful saying in one of the Vedas, Atmanam Rathanam Vidhi. I spoke about this many years ago in Michigan as well. I often say it over and over again because there's a lot of wisdom in the scriptures, and people do need to read these things because it's nice. I mean, if you don't belong to a particular faith, read the other. Make sure you read it. Wealth and friends are but temporary joys. As we get older, you're lying in bed. The only thing you have are those beautiful memories, like the memory of the IIOPM conference today. Never forget that in pursuit of the world, we lose sight of the true joys, which is a clear conscience. These are 3 quotes I've taken from the Holy Quran, the Vedas, and the Bible. So in the Holy Quran, it says, and speak good and be good to people, because being good to people is the utmost legacy you can leave behind. In the Vedas, God knows each and everything about you. Nothing is hidden from him. And in the Bible, it says, dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with action and in truth. With that, I end my lecture. Thank you so much to Shrikant, Professor Mohandas, who actually is an incredible source of knowledge, Professor Russell, but my friends over the years, JS, Rajiv, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Shabir. Incredibly insightful. And really, it was 30 minutes of calming knowledge and wisdom. There was one thing you said, though, that got my amygdala fired up a little bit. And that was when you spoke about the telephone call with JS. I was the person on the phone with him at that time. And I thought, and I had my prefrontal cortex working, and I thought he was talking to the other person. And he was idiot. And now you've got that working. JS, we'll have a chat after this one. I mean, in any event, this has been an incredible series of 3 talks that we've had this afternoon. And one of the things I would share with you, Shabir, following Amitabh Bachchan and Shah Rukh Khan, it's your time. You're Ranveer Singh. And so, it's not Amitabh is done. I mean, I know I mean that. JS, don't take that the wrong way, and Joe, don't take that the wrong way. But in any event, a couple in opening, I would want Dr. Nemagada to share with us, because this has been an incredible day, and we're going to have the second of these virtual seminars a week from today. And there's a lot of activity that will follow that with a postscript. And there's a lot of interest in terms of continued engagement. Dr. Nemagada is going to share additional details. But if I could, JS, let me start off with a question for you. What is one key learning, just one key learning from COVID in terms of how organizations or nations or individuals could learn in order to be more resilient, to be better prepared, and just in general to be able to do better?
I guess the best key learning is, I alluded to that in my lecture, Rajiv, which is that listen to your workforce. This isn't about economy. It's not about the financial situation of a hospital or a trust or a CCG or practice or anything like. It is principally about health. And if you look after your workforce will look after your patients, and your patients will survive. It'll give you a good record. And I would say that we've fallen dismally in every country practically around the world in not being able to look after our health workforce.
I think this has been a common theme through all the three lectures today in different ways. Look after your workforce, look after the people who actually are at the front lines. They're the ones who are being most neglected, if you will, and not represented. And in any event, let me actually, I know there are a series of questions on the chat line. And before I hand it over to Derek to kind of coordinate, or Russell to coordinate that, let me see if the three speakers want to ask each other anything. So Joe, Shabir, JS, anything that you want to ask of each other?
Yeah, I loved a lot of what Joe spoke about. There was so much of information, and what she said is true. He managed to condense everything so well. My concern is, do you think organizations like Google would be willing to actually address the fact that there has to be some kind of a mechanism by which, if someone is Googling one specific aspect, in the search box, they would get the completely opposite view, so that to some extent the individual is forced to review his views?
I don't have confidence that Google would do that. The people who work at Google may be willing to do that, or the people who formerly worked at Google would be willing to do that. The way much of this information is coming is by people who've left the company and have tried to provide a counterbalance. The corporation's purpose of the corporation is to provide profits. And so from the corporate point of view, that's what they do. And the only reason they would try to mitigate it would be as risk management. So that was one view of the corporations coming up with an ethical standard, which they do. Google, Amazon, all of them have very robust ethical standards, but how you operationalize them and make them transparent is not clear. But the people who used to work there, they're helping.
Thank you.
And the dual reality is true. They made the analogy, if you're on social media, that's very prominent, or if you're on TV media. The concern, you go through things like Wikipedia, and they start changing the dynamics in the contact of something like Wikipedia, so you're not even looking at the same reference point.
I haven't got any questions, Reggie, but I comment really that what both of my co-speakers spoke about in the afternoon session is the thing in medicine altogether, not just psychiatry, because I think we are seeing more and more burnout, doctors burning out at the peak of their career when they're only hitting 50, when they should become super specialists. It's really important. And the other thing is, of course, we haven't seen the full strength of what artificial intelligence can do, and what, the full strength. We've seen a lot of negative impacts of the internet and that sort of thing, but we haven't seen the good bit in medicine, to be truthful, or psychiatry.
Thanks, JS. Let me, Derek, the questions are chat, my friend.
Yes, thank you, sir, and thank you, everyone. There's been a lot of appreciation pouring in, as always, because we have these stalwarts who actually get better every time, like a good old Scotch, right, sir? I see Dr. Srinivas has his thinking hat on, and I think he had a question for Professor Joe. So, Srinivas, you can go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Derek. It is a wonderful experience just listening to all these great stalwarts. It's got a lot of inspiration from this session. Professor Thornton, I had actually put it up on the box, and you wanted me to ask the question so we could discuss. When you alluded to artificial intelligence making the decisions in a triad situation, and it set me thinking, how could we morally absolve ourselves of the responsibility and devolve it to the artificial intelligence? Can we do that in a trial situation when somebody is not going to get the care? How could we morally do that? That's the concern that I have.
Well, we make allocation decisions all the time, whether it's access in the US, just coming in the front door to see me. So I work in a system that decides who can see me and who cannot. So that allocation is already made. And then there's various rules and guidelines that we follow that we think we know the origin of. So for example, in Veterans Administration, they provide the data on how they came up with the guidelines. Once you follow a computer generated or AI generated guideline, that can be more difficult. But with all of these things, it's called moral diffusion or diffusion of responsibility, and it's a form of moral disengagement. So it's a danger in all settings, whether it's from AI or from the corporation, because that's how we end up having medical atrocities, is because no one's really accountable for what happens. So we have to be vigilant on the system.
I understand that, but when the human agency takes a decision, we are more trusting. Can we? What if the system the artificial intelligence makes a mistake?
Right now, the AI programs would come up with values that we program into them. If you reach the point where AI programs can generate new knowledge and make new values, they may, the program in theory could come up with a different set of values than what the human has. And so maintaining human control over the AI program is a huge deal. We've already seen it with the military. They made a movie out of it called War Games. You let the computer generate the threat assessment to retaliate with nuclear weapons, or do you keep human control at all times? So this permeates all our society.
Yeah, and there's another film, isn't there? Artificial Intelligence. But I think Joe is right. I think at the end of the day, Srinivas, it's what we feed into the computer at the moment. And it's humans that have got it wrong. So the algorithms for 911 earlier on were wrong. So it's what you put in there. Will there come a time when computers take over you? Well, I don't know what your amygdala says, but my amygdala says no.
Yeah, you have not watched Terminator?
Oh, I've watched it 100 times.
Yeah, thank you.
If I'm allowed just one more comment.
Yes,
I must put on record. I appreciate so much, Shabir. You're phenomenal. You're exceptional. I've been listening to you, and each time you speak, it is such a pleasure. Your voice is so soothing for a psychiatrist. I know all of you are good, but this man is exceptional and is so thoughtful. That's why when Professor Tandon spoke about Shabir, I said it's so wonderful. He is that. It's a pleasure always to listen to you. I don't have a question because my amygdala is completely suppressed.
So Dr. Shabir and Dr. JS, you can bill Shabir a few hours for psychiatric counseling and comfort. Right, Srini? We have this on record, so
and
let's go back.
Professor
Then
Tandon's
you get 2 bills from Canada and the UK.
Professor Tandon's expertise in astrology was a revelation. He gave no clue of that.
One more bill coming from the US your way. No, seriously. Let's get back. Professor Russell, this was actually a question which had come in from the previous session, but since we again spoke about burnout, could you help us understand the difference between PTSD and PTED that you spoke about? Is there any difference? And if so, how could we identify that? PTSD and PTED.
Is that to me?
Yes, yes, for you, Dr. Russell.
Well,
you spoke about post-traumatic embitterment disorder.
Yes,
and
yes,
PTSD.
yes.
So,
yeah. One of the things we said in embitterment is the driving emotion in post-traumatic embitterment disorder, in contrast to anger in the post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And again, if you look back, I brought in looking at the differences in terms of where embitterment, depression, OCD, and PTSD. If you look at that slide, you'd see the only there's quite a lot of differences in terms of embitterment and PTSD. For example, it arises in the context of a relationship, that's embitterment, plus or minus. It can or cannot, not necessarily in terms of a relationship. Then the expression of injustice is key here. That is not necessary in PTSD. We also talk of ruminations is a critical, and that's where Linden shows 70% of your cognitive productivity or optimum is lost. That again is not an issue. And mood disturbance, not an issue so much in embitterment, but it is more of an issue in PTSD. And then when you look at anger, the issue again comes up there. So those are some of the differences between the two post-traumatic embitterment disorder and when you look at post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Shabir, you spoke about stress. Is that right?
Mhm.
And so part of this good stress you spoke about, is that right?
Yeah.
And then we have tolerable stress.
Yes.
And then we have toxic stress.
That is correct. That is correct. Yes.
Dr. Shabir, if you would like to add anything to.
Yeah, I mean, what Russell highlighted is really important because PTSD, we have many patients who come in with, within quotes, treatment resistant PTSD, who have faced gross acts of injustice, right? The moment you identify the embitterment component, the way you work with them is very different. That's why it's so important. It's like differentiating between grief and depression, and you keep treating depression forever, and you've forgotten the grief aspect. Patients don't get better. You failed them technically. This differentiation for me was extremely enlightening. Russell had presented this in, I think it was at Rajiv's place. Am I right, Russell? Was it in Florida? You're done. And I hadn't heard of post-embitterment actually till that time. And when I came back, we had an employee with one of the big companies in Canada, and what he had was post-embitterment. And so the moment I brought this this notion of perceived injustice, and I went and I spoke to him, for him like it was like this a release of the pressure valve. And he said, "That is exactly what I've been feeling, doctor. I'm so happy you acknowledged it." And so for this guy, who was really a, within quotes, difficult patient, he became one of my best patients. So we have to understand the impact of stress, tolerable stress, but then obviously the toxic stress. And in environments of toxic stress, I ask people to shift. If you want to resign your job, you can. You can go and get an alternative job. But the key thing is to be practical rather than feeding into this notion that you're going to give sick letters, stay off work for another month. It doesn't help either of the parties.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shabir, for adding that extremely valuable insight and giving us the balance of both sides. Pratiksha, if you could hear us, you had a question, I believe, for Dr. JS. Would you like to ask that yourself?
Yes, you'll do that.
I believe the question was almost answered in the discussion, but my question was more on the resilience part. So increasingly in the workplace, even our performance management system is based on a competitiveness. And it's very difficult for leaders and the teams to develop the resilience because they are constantly pulled in different directions. There are higher expectations. And it almost seems like you have to build a higher degree of resilience to just do the same role. And I wanted to really understand from Professor Bamra, but what is the advice he would give to the leaders of the organization on how do they build resilience in the team and workforce?
I think, thanks, Pratiksha. It's a really difficult question to answer, but a very good one. I think too often we put the wrong leaders in the wrong places, unfortunately. I think this is certainly true of the National Health Service. I suspect it's true of other health sectors as well. It's very important that leaders are properly equipped to lead their teams. So that's the first thing. So where you have a dysfunctional leader, then you will produce dysfunctional teams. But I think, but let me be a bit charitable and say that most people, everybody wants to do the best that they can under difficult circumstances, particularly at this very testing time. I think that leaders also need support. They're, after all, human beings. And I think that is also has been lacking sometimes because they're too often pushed into performance management. You've got to get so many beds vacated. You've got to get these patients out. You've got to, and you know that that has happened here, unfortunately, and that's why older people died, because people were being pushed out of beds too quickly to the wrong places, putting care homes and care home staff to risk as well. It is a system approach, as I said. You know, the system has to work well, and too often the system has let us down. We should have the ability to call out when things are not going well without being accused of being whistleblowers or troublemakers or anything like that. So where leaders are poor, I think people who work in the team, they need to step up one pace in order to be able to improve things in that unit. That's the best thing I could say, but it is a very good question. I don't know whether Joe and Shabir want to add anything to that.
If I may, I'll try to be real quick. One of my heroes is David Hamburg, who was original chair of psychiatry at Stanford, went on to become head of the Carnegie Foundation. He wrote about leadership in terms of genocide and war, and wrote an article that said leadership matters, and characteristics of poor leadership and good leadership. Poor leadership comes to mind. They tend to narrow down. They're very centered on their organization, their country, and they narrow their decision making. So the people they seek consultation from narrows and gets tighter and less diverse, and they tend to reinforce bad decision making. His counter intervention for that was outside pressure or outside influences. So international organizations, if you're looking at countries engaged in destructive behavior. Unfortunately, we saw that WHO was one of the early victims in the pandemic, the World Health Organization. So we may come through this and decide it's worthwhile to invest in these world bodies again.
Just talking, Jess, about, you said the wrong about the leadership. I was just putting something, you know, we have the, in fact, this is a good opportunity for Srikant's bulletin. We have a very nice bulletin and he's bringing out, so I was just putting something out and I'm just thinking about it. Leadership mastery. One of the things we want is how to master leadership, and one area the research points to emotional intelligence as an answer. And there's also some work on the strong connection between emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and highly effective leadership. So we're talking about a marriage between emotional intelligence and mindfulness. I was just putting something together for the bulletin on this leadership mastery, marrying the marriage between emotional intelligence and mindfulness. You know, they both are based on the ability to observe in moment experiences. Both are based on the ability to control one's attention. And of course, they both are irrevocably married and mutually implicit to one another. So that's a good way of mastering, mastering in leadership.
There's one
like the amygdala and hippocampus, isn't it, Shabir?
No, there's a very interesting thing, Russell, the key point is this a love marriage or an arranged marriage?
Yeah, well, that is true. It's a shotgun marriage.
Yes.
But Russell, you've just talked yourself into doing one thing for IIOPM, which is something on leadership, you see. I think that'd be really good.
Well, we're just putting, I think the last time I wrote something on compassionate leadership, and Tony spoke beautifully in his talk on what they used much of the compassionate leadership in his managing the COVID crisis in his hospital as the CEO there. And then I was thinking about it when you spoke, and I was just putting something together for the bulletin, and that was leadership mastery and how we can marriage between emotional intelligence and mindfulness. So we'll consider. I think we might think it's. I think it's not arranged. It's already there, and we just.
So Russell sir, I just one point about what you said. It's a good analogy. I'm looking at the neurological basis for that. Maybe it's a prefrontal cortex and the corpus callosum, is it, or cingulate gyrus for mindfulness and emotional intelligence? Where is this seat for emotional intelligence?
Well, you know that where the emotional intelligence again comes is how we distance the amygdala from your prefrontal cortex. Emotional intelligence is bringing that, where you have self-awareness, control, and of course empathetic relationship and communication. So all this comes in there. But
I think then it's the prefrontal cortex. And for
this is the case of pati, patni, or wo.
So I think prefrontal cortex and the corpus callosum about mindfulness, maybe the global thinking, unitive thinking.
Where is Mohandas is not here. He'll be the one.
Looking for him as well, I think. So he must be on that other webinar.
But anyhow, in all this, Shabir, salience is important, isn't it?
It is actually. If we had a bit of time, I would have explained the whole.
I'm talking about salience, yes.
And, the salience networks
in that whole area.
You just hit the nail on the head. So the insula plays a profound role in the ability to interpret. When I showed you the slide about the perception, it is our ability to attenuate the reactions of the insula. Because as much as we blame the amygdala, and the amygdala is the drama queen, the insula and part of the locus accumbens are the script writers. So in essence, the amygdala, although is a drama queen, it actually plays to a script, which is why they say garbage in, garbage out. Once you put high emotive content in, that's all you're going to get out, because attenuating it becomes so difficult, it actually gets heightened. So the locus accumbens is what actually helps link these two very different networks. And so for salience, it goes back to the point Subodh was making, mindfulness. You cannot overstate the importance of mindfulness in our lives today. So I just put it in a nutshell because this takes roughly about 2 to 3 hours in terms of the different circuits, but it's fascinating.
Thank you, Professor Shabir, Dr. Russell.
Yeah. So I thought we should bring salience and insula.
Thank you back to Shrikant for giving us the final word, and maybe then we all meet at the second virtual conference. Over to you, Dr. Shrikant.
Thank you, Derek. Fantastic talks, wonderful discussion. I think this sets a tone for the next conference as well. And we have again excellent lineup of speakers and excellent talks for the next session. Same day, Saturday next week. So I would request you all to again attend this conference and also disseminate this information much more widely. And a couple of other points. I think the people who have participated today, I think you'll receive CPD certificates from IIOPM. And also I'll send feedback forms so that you can complete how the sessions went today. And also importantly, also feedback in terms of what other topics we can consider for future conferences. And also importantly, what you would like IIOPM to do to engage with all of you. The academic center is at Chesapeake Park Hospital, and we are trying to coordinate the research activity from various parts of the world. A lot of research is happening in many parts of India, and even at Chesapeake Park, I mean, many graduates, many psychologists have received their master's degrees after doing some relevant research in the field of IIOPM. So I know, I mean, I'm collaborating with Rajiv and Joe and also Shabir in Canada. And importantly, we are expanding some of our offices to Germany. Oliver Seaman.
Oliver's here, yes. We're going to have him Germany.
He came to us, he gave a talk in the last conference 2 years ago on transmagnetic stimulation. So even TMS in terms of improving emotional well-being is a huge topic, and we are doing a multi-center study as well under his leadership in various parts of India. So a lot of activity is happening, and I think the academic center's role is to coordinate all this. But I think without your support and partnership, I think it's very difficult for us to spread the message of the principles of IIOPM across the globe. As you can see, there are so many themes which are relevant to anyone, be it in healthcare organization or public sector or in corporate sector. But I'm really pleased that we had some fantastic presentations, not just from healthcare professionals, but people coming from diverse fields. And likewise, next week as well, we have people talking from corporate sector, psychologists, doctors, and also CEOs from other hospitals, sharing their views in terms of various aspects of human capital management and how it can have impact on the organization and also productivity. So I don't want to elaborate about this in great detail, but eventually I'll send you some more information in terms of what you can do to engage with us. But for now, have a nice day. And I know people are in different time zones. So thank you very much for joining us. And please be present for the next conference next Saturday. Over to you, Derek. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Russell, you have the closing words.
No. I just want, you said all are different parts. I'm already in the next day. I'm on Sunday. It's 2:00 in the morning in Melbourne.
You're so always ahead of everyone.
I'm always ahead. You see,
by a mile. By a mile.
True leader, sir. True leader. You're a true leader.
Always. Yes, I agree. Absolutely.
Dr. Oliver is here. Good to see you.
Yes, Oliver has been with us at all the meetings, and he's doing some work. The COVID disturbed the study that we are doing. One was on power nap. We're using the controlled with a sham and a. We had one initially done which showed power nap to be successful. So now we're using the RTMS, ambulatory RTMS, and at the ambulatory frequency with one with a sham and a one. So we'll be somewhat blinded too, and so that's happening. But there was a little delay because we were using students. The colleges have been closed, and that's being done at Amrita Institute. It went through the ethics committee there and so forth. And through the academic center. I'm sort of following that through. Okay, thank you very much, Derek. Thank you, Srikanth, and all our speakers, and indeed, Tony. Thank you, Tony. As you know, inaugurated at the last meeting. Tony inaugurated the academic center. I came there. I was there at that wonderful conference that was hosted in Doncaster, and we inaugurated the academic center at Chesapeake Park Hospital, and Tony Geatley, the CEO, was the one who inaugurated that. So thank you, and he was there in Michigan also with us, and we're very happy to have. Particularly, was very interested in your elaborating the compassionate leadership, but in practice. and I think that was excellent from what I heard. So thank you all, Joe, and all our colleagues here, and we will stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you next Saturday for the second part of this excellent, wonderful meeting. This conference happens. We were to have one in September, but it's now going to be in Michigan next September. And we probably will have something in the beginning of next year. That's what, right, a virtual one. But we plan with the vaccines coming, we hope to have the September next year at the Western Michigan University again. All right. Thank you, and stay well. Thank you. Right. Thank you, Derek, Shabir.
Bye-bye. Well done, Dr. Srikanth. That was flawless. Wonderful experience. Thank you for
that.
Being part of this wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you for the
experience. And thank you, Subodh.
Derek, you want to stop the recording?
Yes, I shall do that.
Derek
Thank you, and good day to everyone.
Good day. Good morning from Australia.